Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we are going through the book of John. This week, we're going to be in John chapter 12. Now, we just finished up John chapter 11, where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead after being in the grave for 4 days. And then after this, the chief priests of the Jews and the Sanhedrin, the ruling council, they gathered together and said, we got to get rid of this Jesus. So the edict has been made. If anybody knows where Jesus is, they need to report it so that they can seize him and kill him. So now we're going to be in John chapter 12. So let's get out our Bibles. Let's follow along. We're in John chapter 12, verse 1. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. So 6 days before the Passover. We are now in the last week of Jesus' life. Almost half of John's gospel is devoted to just this last week of his life. So verse 2, there they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. So what's Martha doing right now? No surprise there. Martha's serving. That's what Martha is always known for doing. Martha's known for action, for getting stuff done. Mary, she's always at the feet of Jesus, is she not? I was thinking about this, though. Do we sometimes give Martha a bad rap for always being the one serving, always being the one doing things? Can I tell you, I think the world needs more Marthas. The Marthas of the world are the ones that get the things done. Now, different people serve the Lord in different ways. Some people serve the Lord by being the doers, that they're always the ones getting the things done. Others, they just want to bask at the feet of Jesus, be in his presence. The Apostle Paul said this. It's in 1 Corinthians 12:5. He says, there are different ministries, but it is the same Lord. You see, we all worship and serve God differently, but can I tell you this? I think the world needs more Marthas. They're the ones that get the things done. Also, let's look at this here. There they made him a supper. I'm in verse 2. And Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Here's a question for you. Whose house are they at right now? Do we know? Well, we don't know from the book of John, but from the book of Matthew in chapter 26 and from the book of Mark in chapter 14, we know that they are at the house of somebody called Simon the leper. Now, I think there's at least 8 or 9 different Simons in the New Testament. But right now they're at the house of Simon the leper. What do we know about Simon the leper? Not very much. Just that they ate at his house here, and this is when Mary anointed his feet. But we need to ask ourselves this. Do people eat with lepers? Do people socialize with lepers? No, because leprosy was a highly contagious disease. What would they do with the lepers? They would isolate them and ostracize them, and they would be by themselves. So we know that this Simon the leper, whose house they're eating this meal at, must have been somebody who Jesus healed from leprosy that we don't read about. So that's interesting, but also think about this. How does Simon the leper fit in with this group? Is he related to Mary and Martha and Lazarus? I read one commentary that thought that Simon the leper could even maybe be Martha's husband. We don't know that. Or is he just somebody who's following Jesus because Jesus healed him from his leprosy? We don't know. What we do know is this, that in this house right now where this meal is being served, there's at least 17 people in this house because there's Jesus and his 12 disciples. There's 13. There's also Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, 3 more, 16. There's also Simon the leper, 17. So there's at least 17 people in this house at this meal right now. And there's actually probably even more than that. Also notice this. Excuse me. Lazarus is there right now, but we don't get any words out of Lazarus. Don't we wish we got an account of Lazarus? Like, hey, Lazarus, what did you see during those 4 days you were in the tomb? What did you hear? What do you know that we haven't got to see? But we get none of that. The Apostle Paul, it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It says that he got caught up to the third heaven. And you know what he tells us about it? He says, it's so wonderful, there aren't even words to describe it. That's all I can say about it. All right, so verse 3. So they're eating this meal. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, Simon the leper, they're eating this meal. Let's see what Mary does here. Verse 3. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Now, the other 2 accounts in Matthew and Mark, they don't name Mary by name. But that could be because they were written so much earlier and they didn't want to bring unwanted attention on Mary and Martha and Lazarus, because we're going to find out that the Jews want to kill them. John here is writing 50 years later, so all of that is behind them. So he can name names now and doesn't have to worry about anything. So notice Mary, she took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard. What is this? It's a spice. Actually, it's an essential oil from a tree that's like a honeysuckle tree. But it says it was very costly. We're about to find out how expensive it is. But this is probably actually Mary's life savings right here. This would have been how they would have preserved wealth. This could have even been her dowry that she was giving up. So Mary doing this is the same as the widow who gave her 2 mites. She gave everything. How a person spends their money can tell us a lot about their priorities, can it not? Jesus said it's in Matthew 6:21. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So Mary comes, pours this pound of very costly oil of spikenard at the feet of Jesus. And notice even 50 years later, John still remembers the smell of the house all this time later. So verse 4. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. So, what was a denarii? That's how much this stuff cost. Judas said, we could have sold this for 300 denarii. A denarii was a day's wage. So 300 days' wages, that would be a yearly salary. In fact, if you read an NIV or an NLT, it just takes it and says this could have been sold for a year's wage. So this tells us how expensive this was right here. It was a year's wage that Mary just poured at the feet of Jesus. Also think about this. Right here is the only place in the New Testament where it tells us that Judas is evil, other than when he betrays Jesus. But some people try to make the claim, oh, Judas, he was just forcing Jesus' hand and hoping that he would, make himself king by causing a confrontation. No, Judas was a greedy thief, and it cost him his soul. Now, I'm guessing Jesus was the only one that knew Judas was a thief, but yet he still allowed him to be around him. Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him, but he didn't go say, hey guys, seize him and don't let him betray me. No, Jesus let it happen. But I'm guessing nobody else knew that Judas was a thief. In fact, he actually sounds like the guy that you would want to be your money keeper. You would want him to be your treasurer. Because after all, he's like, hey guys, we can't be wasting this money. We could do better things with it. We're like, oh, this Judas, he's such a smart guy. But no, Judas was a thief. Isn't it amazing that Judas, think about this, he could have followed Jesus for 3 years, seen all his miracles, experienced all of Jesus' love and compassion, and yet he still had a rotten heart. Let's keep going here. Verse 7. But Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not always have. Now, Jesus didn't tell us that we shouldn't worry about the poor. He just said, hey, at this moment in time, you aren't going to have me much longer. You'll always have poor people that you need to take care of. Verse 9. Now, a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but also that they might see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. Now, when it says many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus, this probably actually means prominent Jews, probably members of the Sanhedrin like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, high up official Jews that said, we need to go follow this Jesus right here. But notice what they want to do with Lazarus. They don't deny that Jesus raised him from the dead, but they just want to get rid of the evidence that it ever happened. All right, now we're on verse 12. It gets pretty good right here. Verse 12. The next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast. What feast is this? This is the beginning of Passover right here. The Passover was one of the 3 mandatory pilgrimage feasts when everybody would travel to Jerusalem. The other 2 would be Pentecost, 50 days after this, and the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, or the Feast of Booths, when they would live in little huts for a week outside underneath the stars. What does Passover do? It celebrates the deliverance of the children of Israel from the Egyptians of the plague of the firstborn through the 10 plagues. So that's what they're celebrating right now. So verse 12, the next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches of palm trees and went out and met him and cried out, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. So the people are all shouting. They're saying, Hosanna. Hosanna means save now or save us now. And this blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, that's actually Psalm 118:26. So they're fulfilling prophecy right here. What is happening right here? This is what we call Palm Sunday. It's actually the 10th day of the month of Nisan. And it's on this day, on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, that the people would actually select their Passover lamb, and they would take it in their house with them. And this Passover lamb would live with them for 3 days, and then they would sacrifice it. And we actually get this from Exodus chapter 12. I'll read it to you real quick, just because I think this is interesting. This is Exodus chapter 12, and I'm going to start reading in verse 3. Speak to the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, so on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons, according to each man's need. You shall make your count for the lamb. So if you can't afford a lamb, you can split it with a couple households, is what they're saying. Verse 5. Your lamb shall be without blemish. Remember, Jesus is our sacrificial Passover lamb. He was perfect, without blemish. A male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. And then listen to this in verse 6. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day. So you get it on the 10th day of the month. On the 14th day of the month, the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. So the people would actually get their Passover lambs on this 10th day of the month of Nisan. That's when we celebrate Palm Sunday, when Jesus came into the city on a donkey. They would get their lambs, and they would actually bring it in their household, and it would live with them for 3 days, and then they would sacrifice it. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why would God want them to do it this way? Think about that. You bring a little baby lamb into your house for 3 days, it's going to become like a pet. The children are going to play with it and feed it and pet it, and then you have to sacrifice it. Well, it's a picture of what Jesus did for us. Think about it. Jesus came and lived with us before he was sacrificed. Also, think about this. It wasn't supposed to be easy. The lamb was to become part of your family. It was supposed to be hard to kill that lamb, because that would make you pause and consider how important it was and how serious sin is. And it's my sin that means that this thing has to get sacrificed. So it was supposed to be hard to kill that lamb. It wasn't supposed to be easy. Now, Josephus, he told us that 1 year for the Passover that 250,000 lambs were sacrificed. That's a lot of lambs, isn't it? All right, let's keep going here. So verse 12. The next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went out and met him, cried, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. I don't know how many people were in the city. I read lots of different accounts. Some people said there would be 100,000 people there during the Passover. Others, if Josephus says there was 250,000 lambs, that means there had to be in the millions of people here. So all the people are lining. They have palm branches, and they're shouting and praising Jesus. Verse 14. Then Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, sat on it. As it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. Why is Jesus riding on a donkey? Pure and simple, to fulfill prophecy. It's Zechariah chapter 9. I'm going to turn my Bible here, and says, this is Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. 400 years before Jesus came, Zechariah wrote that, hey, your king will come into town riding on a donkey. Here, Jesus is doing it right now. One last thing I want to talk about today, and we're going to end in this, but one last thing I want to talk about. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, Daniel actually gives us a prophecy about the coming Messiah. I'm going to turn there. Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Daniel 9:25 says this, and this is important. You need to listen. Now, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The streets shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. So Daniel says, hey, from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, we know exactly when that command was given. And it's in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. That was when Artaxerxes gave Nehemiah the decree that he could go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So Nehemiah goes back, and if you remember when we studied that, he rebuilt the walls in only 52 days. So we know the exact date of that decree. There's a man named Sir Robert Anderson. He wrote a book called The Coming Prince, and he looked at this prophecy right here. And so from the time of that decree, there will be 7 weeks, and we take that to mean that there will be 7 7-year periods. That's what the weeks means. And 62 weeks. If you add that up, that's 483 years. Now, Sir Robert Anderson took that 483 years, converted that using a 360-day calendar, which the Jews would have used, and come up with 173,880 days. Sir Robert Anderson says that Daniel 9:25, to the exact day, from the command going forth to rebuild Jerusalem that was given to Nehemiah until what we just read about in John chapter 12, Palm Sunday, Jesus coming into town, we're riding on a donkey, that was the exact day that Jesus' triumphant entry fulfilled Daniel 9:25 to the exact date. 173,880 days later, Jesus right now is fulfilling Daniel chapter 9:25. What does that tell us? That tells us that God has a timetable and everything is right on schedule. If God decrees it, it's going to happen. And what did Jesus say? One day you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. One day it's going to happen. I can't tell you when, but we can look forward to it. So we're done with John chapter 12. What did we get? We got a few verses through today. We'll keep going. We'll pick up where we left off next week. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. And I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.